When you think of wealthy countries in Asia, which ones come to mind first? Japan, China, Singapore? But what if I told you that Malaysia, often overlooked, has been quietly building one of the most resilient and diversified economies in the region without shouting about it? This is the brilliant strategy behind Malaysia's silent wealth. Let's dig deeper. Malaysia sits at the very heart of Southeast Asia, a land of strategic importance, nestled between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Its geography is no coincidence in its story. This location has for centuries made it a vital stop for traders, empires, and colonizers. From ancient spice routes to today's global shipping lanes, Malaysia has always been part of something much bigger. But let's rewind. Before the skyscrapers of Kuala Lumpur rose into the clouds, Malaysia was a British colony, a prized one at that. Rich in natural resources like rubber and tin, the land was cultivated and mined not for the people's prosperity, but for the British Empire's gain. The British built railroads, ports, and schools. But more importantly, they brought in millions of migrant workers, mostly from China and India, to fuel their industries. The result? A nation unlike any other, a deeply diverse mix of Malays, Chinese, Indians, and indigenous peoples, such as the Orang Asli in peninsular Malaysia and the Dayakas and Kadazan Dasan in Borneo. And please excuse my lack of Malay pronunciation. Now, diversity can either divide or define a country. In Malaysia's case, it did both. At times, this mix of cultures led to friction, like the race riots of 1969, a dark chapter in Malaysian history. But it also forged a society that was multilingual, multi religious, and remarkably adaptable. Where else can you find a street where a mosque, a Hindu temple, and a Chinese temple stand within walking distance from each other? The British may have left in 1957, but they did not just leave behind buildings and railways. They left behind a blueprint, legal systems, English education, parliamentary governance, and a complex social puzzle. Malaysia had to make it work, and it did, in its own way. Instead of turning its back on its colonial past, Malaysia learned from it. Instead of choosing one identity, it embraced many. Schools began teaching Bahasa Malaysia, but English remained widely used in business. The new economic policy in the 1970s was introduced to reduce economic disparities between ethnic groups, especially to uplift the majority Malays. And then came the big shift. Rubber and tin were not going to carry Malaysia forever, so the country made bold moves. It diversified. Factories sprung up, churning out electronics instead of latex. The free trade zones in Penang and Selangor became magnets for foreign investors. Malaysia began exporting semiconductors, palm oil, gas, and even cars. Proton, the country's national car project, was launched in 1983 with pride. But beneath it all, Malaysia's diversity quietly powered this transformation. Chinese Malaysians led major business ventures. Indian Malaysians dominated the legal and medical professions. Malay leadership shaped national identity and stability. Even today, Malaysia's food, music, and holidays reflect this cultural diversity. Hari Raya, Chinese New Year's, Deepavali, all celebrated nationwide. So, how did Malaysia go from colonial outpost to modern state? By learning from its geography, by managing and sometimes struggling with its diversity, and by turning a colonial legacy into a launchpad for something entirely its own. It's not a perfect story, but it's a remarkable one, and it's only just getting started. Let's rewind to the early 1980s. Malaysia was still very much a resource exporting country. Rubber, palm oil, and tin were the main pillars of the economy. But then came Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, a bold and visionary leader. He once said, we cannot always depend on others. We must be independent. We must be industrialized. He launched the Look East policy, aiming to emulate Japan and South Korea's work ethic, innovation, and discipline. The most symbolic shift came with Proton, Malaysia's first national car company, in 1983. Industrial zones began appearing in Penang, Selangor, and Johor. Malaysia became a major player in global electronics and semiconductor supply chains. Have you ever used a microchip made in Penang? There is a strong chance you have. The world did not notice, but Malaysia did not need the applause. It wanted results. Many countries fall into the resource curse. Malaysia chose a different path. Through Petronas, it not only extracted oil, it built refining capacity, petrochemical plants, and export terminals. Petronas is now among the Fortune Global 500. And palm oil, Malaysia is now the second largest producer in the world, supporting millions of jobs and exporting to over 150 countries. Instead of wasting its wealth, Malaysia created Khazanah Nasional, a sovereign wealth fund that invests domestically and internationally, from healthcare in Turkey to real estate in the UK. Did you know this fund even backs airlines, hospitals, and tech startups? Malaysia's strategy was not just growth, it was spread out growth. But one of the most fascinating moves, Islamic finance. Malaysia did not just become a regional hub, it became a global leader. With Islamic compliant bonds, banks, and investments, Malaysia attracted wealth from the Middle East, Central Asia, and even Africa. Our economy is strong not because we shouted louder, but because we built broader foundations, Najib Razak once said. Behind every success story is a strong workforce. Malaysia did not ignore that. Through initiatives like Vision 2020, it aimed to become a high income, knowledge based society. Thousands of students were given government scholarships to study overseas, many in engineering, finance, and tech, with the goal of returning to serve Malaysia. Have you ever met a Malaysian doctor, pilot, or engineer working in Dubai or London? Their skills are respected worldwide. This is no accident. Now let's be honest. Malaysia has had its share of political drama, from the 1MDB scandal to multiple changes in government within just a few years. But the economy, it kept going. That's the brilliance of Malaysia's design. It doesn't rely on one leader or one sector. Its foundation is too wide, too deep, too smart. Even during political turbulence, the factories kept running, the oil kept flowing, the tourists kept coming. Today, Malaysia is not trying to be loud, but it's still been noticed. It's a leader in halal exports, a rising hotspot for digital nomads and remote work, a strategic location for regional headquarters in Southeast Asia. It even launched the Malaysia Digital Economy Blueprint, aiming to become a regional tech and digital services hub. All of this without making noise. Isn't that a sign of a real confidence? Let's end with an interesting Malay proverb. Wealth is like perfume. It's better noticed quietly